number of Sundays. In the mornings during the adult class downstairs at 9:45, Sheldon has been leading that class through a series of discussions in the area where you find four main themes that have been kind of covered over the last number of Sundays, areas of forgiveness and grace and justice and mercy. He's brought several media stories of well-known people from our very own province, from our very own area, who had to deal with those four themes in one way or another. People such as Cliff and Wilma Dirksen, George Penner, the Kendall Weeb family. People have had to work their way through some very challenging issues, these very challenging things. And each story, as I've been sitting and listening, and all of us, I suppose, are in the same place, we hear this array of opinion that comes, that ranging, a range of opinion as the class, as each of us as individuals are trying to find a way to relate to those themes in one way or another of forgiveness and grace and mercy and justice and forgiveness. If you have never had to ask for forgiveness, or if you have never had to grant it, I want to tell you, you are a very unique person. In fact, you are probably the only one of your kind on this planet, so you can feel very special in that way. But I don't think any of us have ever been there, or can claim that, I should say. And some of what I'm going to say this morning, it might not be overly new to those who attend the class, not that I speak a whole lot down there, but I guess you'll have to forgive me of that, right? A few Sundays back, we covered a story from the book of Genesis that consists of these four things. You find these four themes of forgiveness and of grace and of mercy and of justice. And it comes from within the house of Jacob. Remember Jacob, he's one of the covenant fathers, one of the patriarch fathers, I should say. There was Abraham, and there was Isaac, and then there was Jacob, right? And we're going to be dealing or centering in on two main characters within our time here this morning. And we're going to begin with one of them, and his name was Joseph. And Joseph, he was Jacob's second youngest son. And Jacob, if you remember his story, he had 12 sons given to him through two wives. Remember that? He had two wives who happened to be sisters. Okay, remember, we're in Genesis, and we're going to find out what we're all up against here, what we're dealing with here. And the sisters' names were Leah and Rachel. And if you remember this whole story, Jacob had been deceived into marrying Leah. He loved Rachel, and he wanted to be with Rachel. And he had this agreement that he would work so many years for this fellow by the name of Laban. And Laban said, after those 7 years, Rachel's yours. And how in the wide world it worked out the way it worked out, but it didn't. Jacob wakes up the next morning after his wedding, and who's there beside him is Leah. We're in the book of Genesis, the handbook of dysfunction, if there ever was one. And although, if there's a silver lining that's there, he eventually married Rachel too. And so he's got two wives. And listen, as you read through the pages of Genesis with your eyes wide open, you're going to make a discovery. You will see something, especially when you read about this covenant family, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their kids, and the thought that may be swirling around in your mind, this very line, this very thing would be something like this. Wow, what a mess. What a mess we have before here. What a dysfunctional bunch of people. They're selfish and abusive, and they're ignorant and mean, and they're narrow-minded. Schemers. And yet within this covenant family, God chooses to do something so wonderful and so miraculous that it forever changes human history. And when God chooses to do something, he does it in a way which leaves little room for doubt in that it could have only been by God that something so wonderful and so good could have happened here. And God would have to be in it all. Because again, they were a mess. And so let's go to our story. We're going to begin with with Joseph. And again, his father was Jacob, 12 sons. The 10 oldest sons were from Leah, and the 2 younger sons were from Rachel. And they named those 2 young sons Joseph and Benjamin. And Jacob really loved these 2 kids. Really loved these 2 kids. And the 10 older brothers started to make a little bit of a discovery themselves. You know what? Dad really likes those 2 kids from the other mom. Really likes them. And they really had a distaste for these 2 young kids. And it would appear to me that Jacob really spoiled these 2 kids. And the 10 oldest, what we find here is they had a real hate on for Joseph. They really didn't like him. And perhaps Joseph really didn't make things real easy either. Maybe he didn't make himself lovable at times. maybe he added to the problem, because maybe his appreciation for his brothers wasn't all that high either. You remember the dreams of Joseph? Joseph had 2 dreams. And they were prophetical dreams. Dreams from God, I believe. But maybe Joseph could have really thought through of whether it was a good idea to share those dreams with his brothers or not. Maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe he shouldn't have. You see, I think that Joseph was a highly intelligent fellow. When you look at where he all went in life and what God all did through him, I think this was a very sharp fellow, a very intelligent fellow. And I think when he shared his dreams with his brothers, he knew full well the reaction that he was going to get from his brothers. Because maybe his relationship to them wasn't that great either, the way he handled himself with them. And you know, sometimes people do that, don't they? When there's dissension, they're going to throw a log onto the fire just to make it burn a little hotter, right? And here are Joseph's 2 dreams that he shared with his brothers. Dream number 1. This is Joseph. Listen to this. Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of corn out in the field. He's talking to his brothers here. When suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to him. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Listen to that last line. It's there. The author of this put it there, and they hated him. All the more because of his dream and because of what he had said. And you know, if that isn't enough, Joseph has another dream. Hey, listen to this, guys. Dream number 2. Listen, I had another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Well, that went over real well, too. And Jacob himself, his father, doesn't like this any more than the brothers do. And when he told his father, as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? You know what? Maybe there are some things that are better left unsaid. And maybe it's better just to let things kind of play out rather than say too much at times. So we know that the brothers hated Joseph, really hated him. And this sets the stage for the back half of chapter 37 of Genesis, where we find the 10 older brothers. They're a long way away from home. They have their sheep or goats or whatever it is that they're looking after, probably sheep and goats, and they're tending the flocks is what we find. They're looking after them, a long way from home. And Jacob sends Joseph to go out to see how the brothers are doing. Go check on them, bring a report back as to how they're doing. I need to know. And so Joseph goes. And as he's coming, they can see him from a long way off. And how did they know it was him from a long way off? Were they expecting him? Maybe they were. Or, remember he said that his dad lavished him with a lot of gifts, right? Maybe he was wearing, remember the colorful coat? There's actually, I think, musicals and stories and plays that are set to this. Joseph's coat of many colors. Even songs. Maybe they recognized his coat because he was wearing it, a colorful coat. And they see him in the distance. And they recognize him. And they see an opportunity. And it's an evil opportunity. They say, hey, here comes the dreamer. Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him. And let's throw him into one of these cisterns over here and say that a ferocious animal got to him and devoured him. And then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Dream number 1 and dream number 2. But the oldest brother, Reuben, has a bit of a problem with that. You know, we can't kill our brother. We can't have our own flesh as blood on our hands. That will not do. We can't do that. So just for now, throw him in the cistern, and we'll figure something out from there. So that's what they do. And Reuben he's trying to save his brother. He wanted to spare Joseph's life. He didn't want him hurt. But while I guess Reuben is preoccupied with something else, another character enters our story. And he is another brother, and his name is Judah. And Judah is a real rascal. He's all about self-gain, Judah, and a real wicked streak ran through this fellow. And he says to his brothers, you know what, Reuben is right. We shouldn't kill him. Why kill him? What are we going to get from that? Why don't we do this? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites when they come by. That way, Joseph's blood isn't on our hands at all. And then maybe we can get something for him. We'll sell him. Reuben will feel absolved because Joseph's alive. We wouldn't have killed him, and he can feel absolved over that. We're going to make a few bucks out of it too. And the other 8 brothers that are listening to Judah agree with this. And this is what happens. And so at around 18 years of age or so, thereabout, Joseph is sold to these Ishmaelite traders who take him into Egypt, and he's sold for 20 shekels of silver, and off to Egypt he goes as a slave. How about that? And now the cover-up. They go home to their dad, they have Joseph's coat, and they put goat's blood on it, and they say, Dad, look at this, this is what we found. This is Joseph's, is this not your son's coat? It looks like a wild animal has got it. It looks like he's gone. And his dad is mourning and mourning and mourning over this. And this was a lie that the brothers kept and lived with for more than 20 years. And whether there was some, or even if there was some moral and ethical growth that had happened within some of these brothers where their conscience was aroused or speaking to them in some way or another, if the Spirit of God was hammering on the door to their heart saying, this has to be cleaned up, it has to be made right, they didn't listen. It wasn't enough for them to crack and come clean. And they were in a certain place that I believe they felt was an impossible place, a place of hopelessness. The dilemma that they were in, they felt was beyond hope. However, God's hand was on Joseph through the years. And it wasn't an easy time for him. It couldn't have been while in slavery, but God was with him. And eventually, Joseph rose in status, and he's serving in the house of a fellow by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar is a captain in the Egyptian army. And he wants some favor with this Potiphar, and Potiphar puts him in charge of everything that he has. Potiphar really liked Joseph. But there is a problem because someone else liked Joseph too in that household. And it was Potiphar's wife. She liked him. Really liked him. And quite a lot, in fact. And she wanted to get to know Joseph even better. And she would call him to her bedroom, but Joseph refused her advances. Well, she's a woman scorned. And she fabricates a story, accusing Joseph of trying to force himself upon her. And Potiphar believes this, and has him thrown in jail, has him thrown in prison. And I often have wondered at this moment, you see this roller coaster of a ride that Joseph is on, and he's in prison now. I wonder how many times that a lingering thought or a thought would have been rolling through his mind while he's sitting in prison. Like, how is it that I find myself in this place? How is it that I am here? Where did it all begin? Well, it began with my filthy, deceitful, and corrupted brothers. That's where it all began. How could they have done this to me? I think for Joseph, there had to be moments like that in his life, because he is as human as you and I. There had to be a moment like that. And in a world of honor and of vengeance, where offenses are rarely, if ever, forgotten, and scores were constantly being settled, I think that Joseph would have had moments when he would have been filled with bitterness and with rage and even hatred. But you know what? He didn't stay there. He didn't stay in those places. Instead of remaining bitter, he became better, and a prison of bitterness could have been his life. But he trusted God. He trusted God, and while his circumstances, he would not have known what his future looked like. He trusted God still through it all. Well, really fast-tracking now. Eventually, Joseph was released from prison. And in prison, he had gained this reputation of being a fellow who could interpret dreams. And it just so happened that the Pharaoh had a few dreams that were really bothering him. They were really on his mind. What could they mean? And he hears about this fellow. News traveled to his office, I guess, that there was a fellow within the region, within the area, within prison, who could interpret dreams. His name was Joseph. And they had bring Joseph before him. And the Pharaoh asks him if he can interpret his dream. And Joseph says, I can't, but God can. And he gives all the credit to God, right off the hop, right away. And he says, your dreams, they mean this, is that there's going to be 7 years of agricultural abundance. It's going to be so good in this land. But when those 7 years are done, there is going to be 7 years of real intense famine. A real drought is on the way. And so now Joseph earns some favor with Pharaoh. And he becomes instrumental in bringing Egypt through a very horrific famine. He becomes the second most powerful man in all of Egypt, Joseph, the governor. Second only to Pharaoh. And he is instrumental in bringing Egypt through this horrific famine. And they store up food and grain during those 7 years of plenty so that they're going to get through the 7 years of famine. So that they're going to survive. And you know what? That famine did hit. And it hit really hard. And it was far-reaching. How far-reaching was it? Well, it reached all the way back, all the way to Jacob's household. They feel it, and they feel it exceptionally hard. And now the brothers, they re-enter our story. They're running out of resources, they're running out of food, and they don't know what to do, and they're confused. Oh, man. But Jacob seems to know what to do. This is what he says. Where are we at, Joe? No, you're a little bit ahead. Okay, don't worry about it. This is what he said. Jacob, why do you keep looking at each other? He continued. I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy for us some so that we may live and not die. So what are you doing, guys? It's just, come on, go get some food here. And so the 10 brothers go. One brother stays home, that's Benjamin. Benjamin's not going to make that trek with them. Jacob's not going to let him make that trek with them. And when they arrive in Egypt, they have to stand before the governor of Egypt. And they bow down before this governor, really hoping that they're going to earn some favor with him, really hoping that all's going to go very, very well, that they'll be very well received, so that they're going to be allowed to buy grain that they can bring home to feed the household, to feed all of their people. And who's the governor? Well, the governor is their long-lost brother, Joseph. But they don't recognize him. Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him. And he questions their intentions for being in Egypt, knowing, these are my brothers, these are the rotters, these are the guys. And he says, you're here to spy this place out, aren't you? That's what your true intentions of being here. You're not here just for food or for food at all. You're looking for a weak spot where you can actually penetrate this city and do some harm. No. That's not why we're here at all. We just want to buy grain. And this governor really puts the needles to these guys. And as they talk, the brothers reveal to the governor, to Joseph, that they used to be 12 brothers. One's at home with dad, and the other one is no more. So there's a little divulging of things that's going on here. And Joseph keeps up the act. He says, well, okay, to prove that you're not spies, one of you is going to stay here in prison, and I'm going to give the rest of you enough food to get home, and you're going to get that remaining brother that's back there, and you're going to bring him here. And then you can buy grain. Well, now the brothers are really distressed over this. They don't like this idea at all. And they are speaking in their own mother tongue, their own language between themselves, which I guess wasn't the mainstream Egyptian language, thinking that the governor can't understand what they're saying. You know how that goes sometimes, right? Where you're standing in the midst of some people and they go low German on you, like you don't know what they're saying. And, well, I don't know what they're saying, so I'll throw out the word like Bodeister or Melnick every now and then and hope that I'll get a reaction, but I don't even know what those words mean. But they're speaking in this different language, in their dialect, and the governor understands every word. And the brothers, God has finally caught up with us here. We're being punished for what we did to our brother years ago. It was a very bad thing that we did. And you look at what these brothers are living with here, with this lie that they're living with, this crime that had been swept under the rug, and no one had known what had happened to Joseph. No one had known, other than them. But there was someone else besides Joseph who knew, and it was God. God sees all. God knows all. And the stress that they must have been living with, but you know what? They wouldn't repent. They may have been sorry about it, but they would not repent. And choosing to ignore and doing what is right, it never works out well. And when we choose to not do what is right, it is needless stress and tension that we bring on ourselves. And God says, we can do things differently here. We can do things so differently because you're obviously not happy. Quit being so stubborn and follow me. Follow me, because all that I have for you would be so much better than what you're living through now. Well, the brothers return home. And they return home with a very heavy heart, because they're going to have to deliver some news to Jacob that he isn't going to be very excited about. And you know what? He was not excited at all. In fact, he was completely distressed with the fear that he might lose his precious Benjamin now too. And then something interesting happens. One of the brothers attempts to sincerely calm his father down. And he says this, and he means it. Send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. And off they go with Benjamin. And the second visit to Egypt, initially, is a much better experience for them. And they're received so very well. And they dine together. And when Joseph saw Benjamin, he recognizes Benjamin. You read the story, Joseph was all he could do to keep himself together. But he did. Still didn't reveal who he was. And then he gives orders that the brothers be well stocked with grain. And that their own personal bags be stocked with grain with their cup, their drinking cup, put on the top. And then he says, but in the youngest one here, in Benjamin's bag, on the top, you put his cup, but you put another cup with it. My own personal cup. And so that's what they do. And they send the boys off, or the men off, and off they go, and they travel a short distance, and all of a sudden there is this battalion that catches up with them. And there's a search. A search for what? Somebody has stolen the governor's cup. Well, search. And they search, and they search, and where does the search wind up? Right with Benjamin. And there's the cup. Benjamin stole this cup, is the story. And the brothers, they're hauled back to Egypt. And now Joseph really lets them have it. He says, who do you think you guys are? After the way I've treated you, how did you ever think you're going to get away with something like this? Do you know who I am? Do you know? Well, no, they didn't. And the brothers plead for mercy. And Joseph says, you know what? I'm a fair person. I'm not going to punish all of you. Just the one. Just the one guy, the one man who's guilty of this crime. And who's going to get it? Benjamin's going to get it. Well, this was bad news. This was really, really bad. And now another very interesting thing happens. The same brother who spoke earlier speaks again, pleading with the governor to let his brother go free, asking for all of his brothers to go, really, but specifically Benjamin, keep me instead. Don't keep him. It is going to bring such pain to my father, I would not be able to bear it. And it's a very moving plea that this brother gives, and it's found in chapter 44 of Genesis. When you go home, read through it. It is quite the discourse. And for the first time in the Bible, we see a vicarious sacrifice being offered here where one person is willing to lay down his life for another, for a brother. And who was the brother that is so moved to do this? It's Judah. You know, the same Judah who came up with the idea years earlier to sell Joseph, throw him in a cistern, sell him those Ishmaelites, we'll get 20 pieces of silver for this. This is a good deal for us. It's a win-win. And now this same Joseph, or Judah, now stands before his long-lost brother, unknowingly offering his life to spare another brother. And Joseph is convinced now. He is convinced that there is a change that has taken place within his brothers. He knows it. There is remorse. And these are not the same brothers from years earlier. And now Joseph reveals himself to them, who he is, his true identity. And they're reunited. And Father Jacob is brought into the picture a while later, and he's reunited with his son, and the brothers are together, and there's a real moment of grace that we see in the book of Genesis, which is really a nice welcome change. And why? Because one person found himself so full of the Spirit of God that he would love his God and his brothers so much that he would do whatever it took to stop the awful patterns of deceit and unhealthy living and accept whatever consequences might come from it. He would do what is right. And so the question that I think we have to ask is, what happened to Judah? What happened to him that would cause such a radical shift in him, such a radical change to the point where he would do such a 180 and stand before his brothers, offering his life up for them? And I think the answer is found in Genesis chapter 38. And you know what? Genesis chapter 38, to me, is a very disturbing chapter, to the point where it's like, why do we have to have this here? But maybe as we kind of go through it a little bit, we'll make that discovery, why it's there. You see, Judah in chapter 38, and I'm going to fast track through it, he married into a Canaanite culture that was riddled with paganism, told not to do it, but he did it anyway, and it was a culture that did not regard the living God or his ways and precepts, but you know what? God has a way of finding people in the midst of real mire, in the midst of great lostness, and in this culture he finds Judah. And we find that Judah marries a girl by the name of Shua. And together they have 3 sons. And I guess when they're thinking, what should we name the first one? Judah goes, because that was the name of the first one, was Onan, and Shelah. And Judah, he finds a wife for and her name was Tamar. And we are told that had done evil in the eyes of the Lord, and took him. And so now Tamar is without a husband. And the Canaanite custom is that when the one dies, like in that case well then Tamar would then become the wife of the next one in line, Onan. And so that's what happens. But we find the same thing. Onan did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and the Lord took him. Well, now there's only one son left, and that's Shelah. Well, Judah is a sharp fellow too, right? He had a sharp mind that he used in some pretty awful ways. And he's kind of he's doing his little mental math, I suppose, and comes up with and he has a fear. Well, if she was the husband, but what happened to her and Onan? I don't want that to happen to Shelah. And so he says to Tamar, just relax a little bit, wait till he comes of age, and then I'll give you to him to be married and so forth. And Tamar didn't have children, and that's a big deal in that culture, a very big deal. And she knows Judah's heart quite well. She knows it very well, and she knows that he has no intention of allowing that marriage to take place at all. She knows this. But Tamar, what we find is that she doesn't like that plan. She doesn't like Judah's saying just wait. But what we find is that Tamar is equally as schematic as what Judah is. She proved to be Judah's equal when it came to scheming and devising plans for self-gain. And now Judah, as we move along here, he lost his wife. She died. Shelah was gone. He mourned for her, and when his mourning was finished, it was time to go to a nearby city by the name of Timnah to have his sheep sheared. Now this was an annual thing that would take place in this place called Timnah. Sheep being brought there to be sheared, but there was also lots of other things that went on at this time of the year in Timnah. It was a huge party fest, a huge blast that would go on there. And Tamar is knowing what would be on her father-in-law's, what his agenda would consist of. It would be more than just business. It would be more than just getting the sheep sheared. And what she does is she runs to Timnah ahead of them. And she places herself at the city gate. And she's not dressed like Tamar back in the household of Judah. She's now dressed as a prostitute. She looks that part. And Judah's on his way down there, and he's going to cut loose under the guise of business. And when he gets to the city gate, he sees her, and he's immediately attracted to her. And he goes to her, and he propositions her, or inquires of her services, believing that she was a prostitute. And the agreement they make in exchange for her services is a young goat. But he can't give her the goat immediately. Maybe because they're all getting sheared. And so Tamar says, well, we need some collateral then. I mean, we can't just do business on your good word. And he says, well, okay. And so he gives her 3 personal items. His ring, his staff, and I'm thinking his ring is more than just, it would be that maybe that seal that you kind of punch on things, possibly. But he gives her this ring, his staff, and his cord. And he gives her these items. And when their business is completed, well, then Judah goes to get this young goat to give to her so he can get his 3 personal items back. But they can't find Tamar after that. Because Tamar, she takes off with those 3 items. She goes back home. She's on her way back home. And remember that Judah, he is still entrenched in this pattern of immorality where you hide all of your transgressions. You don't let anyone see what you're really about or what you're up to. And so he's going to cut his losses too, and he just leaves Timnah without his cord, and without his staff, and without his ring. No one would know. And isn't that people? So secretive at times, ignoring to do what is right for what is wrong. Who's ever going to know? More concerned with what others think than what God thinks. Well, everyone is back home. And Timnah, their time in Timnah, it's becoming a distant memory. However, about 3 months later, from that period of time, Tamar is looking a little different. Tamar is looking not quite as far along as what Brienne is, but about 3 months pregnant. And she's drawn some attention to herself now. And someone brings it to Judah's attention. You know what? Tamar doesn't have a husband. And she's with child. She's expecting here. What are we going to do? And what does Judah say? His response. Bring her out here and have her burned to death. Can you believe this? What a double-minded scoundrel. And Tamar is brought out, but before any punishment can be exacted out or handed out, she reveals to everyone that's there the father of her child, the child that she's carrying, by placing before Judah 3 personal things. And she says, the father of this child is the owner of this staff, of this ring, and of this cord. Do they look familiar? Boom. And Judah, he is caught red-handed here, and nothing could be said. There's nothing that can be said except for maybe the first honest words that were ever slipped past his lips in a very, very long time. She is more righteous than I. As scheming as she has been, she is more righteous than I. And it goes on to say, and he did not sleep with her again. And I believe that this moment in Judah's life, this is why chapter 38 is before us, because this moment in Judah's life had forever changed him. And he made a choice here at this moment, I think, to give it up, to give up selfish pursuit of personal gain. And whatever it was, whether it was lust or wealth or whatever, he was more concerned now about his own personal standing with the Lord of heaven and earth, than he was about anything else now. And he confessed and repented. Truly repented. Asking for forgiveness from a holy God who heard his cries and forgave. And now come hell or high water, thereafter, Judah would strive to do what is right because he knew that this is what God would want for him. And he knew how awful of a prison it is when you choose to go a different direction than from what God lays out for us. His life took a radical shift. And life is so much brighter when we focus on what truly matters, doesn't it? Cycles of sin and bad habits, unhealthy living in those sorts of patterns are broken when a person just makes this decision. No more. I am done with this. I am done with unhealthy living. I am done with bad choices and with selfish choices, with bad talk. I am done with all meaningless living. I'm finished with it. I can't do it anymore. And God, I can't do it alone. I am yours. And this choice is what will break wide open into any person's life the goodness and the grace of God. And it's the very reason, I believe, why Judah, 20 years later, could stand before the governor of Egypt and say, let my brothers go. Let them go and take me. I cannot bring any more grief to my father than what he's already had to endure. And the result is a family is brought back together here. A family is brought back together by the grace of God. And God does a miracle that not one of those brothers would ever have anticipated, that they could ever have foreseen could be a reality for them. And not every story is going to have such a great ending or such a happy ending. But there is no greater comfort in this still. There is no greater comfort in knowing that we are walking in the footsteps that God puts before us. Where we embrace what matters deeply to our God. And what is that? Well, we're all different, unique individuals. We are all in different places. We all have our own things going on in our life. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O man, or O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And as God's people strive in this, lives will change. They will change. Bad cycles are broken, and they're replaced with healing and with